Today, we are going to look at the horrifying last minutes of people mauled by wild animals. From a social media creator in rural India who tried handling venomous snakes for viral content, to a debt-ridden worker in Arizona whose midnight break-in ended with a rattlesnake encounter.
It was March 15, 2017, in the rural outskirts of Pune, Maharashtra, India, where agricultural fields stretched endlessly under the afternoon sun. The region, known for its fertile soil and traditional farming practices, had become increasingly populated with young people seeking alternative income sources through social media. Among the scattered farmhouses and irrigation channels, wildlife encounters were common, particularly during the warmer months when snakes emerged from their winter shelters. The area's proximity to the Western Ghats mountain range created ideal habitat conditions for various venomous species, making human-snake encounters an unfortunate reality for local residents. Rohan Sharma, a 24-year-old part-time electronics store employee, had been building his social media presence for 8 months, accumulating 4,200 followers through increasingly dangerous stunts. His content ranged from handling aggressive street dogs to climbing abandoned buildings, each video designed to capture more views and engagement. Colleagues at the electronics store, particularly his friend Prakash, had repeatedly warned him about the escalating risks he was taking for online fame. Rohan's supervisor had noticed his frequent absences and declining work performance as he became more obsessed with creating viral content. For 2 weeks prior to this incident, Rohan had been researching snake handling videos online, convinced that animal content would propel his channel to viral status. He had heard from local residents about frequent snake sightings in the agricultural areas outside Pune, where Russell's vipers were known to inhabit the rocky terrain and field boundaries. The location he selected was an isolated field approximately 12 miles from the city center, chosen specifically for its reported snake activity and lack of human interference. Local farmers had warned about increased snake activity in the area following recent irrigation work that had disrupted their natural habitats. Rohan arrived at the location around 2 p.m., carrying his smartphone, a cloth bag, and basic recording equipment. His plan, as later reconstructed from his phone's GPS data and recovered belongings, was to locate, capture, and handle venomous snakes for his social media content. The field contained scattered rock formations and sparse vegetation typical of the region's landscape. Temperature readings from nearby weather stations indicated it was 89 degrees Fahrenheit, optimal conditions for snake activity. The Russell's viper, scientifically known as Daboia russelli, is one of India's most dangerous venomous snakes, responsible for thousands of deaths annually across the subcontinent. These thick-bodied serpents typically measure 3 to 5 feet in length and possess highly potent hemotoxic venom that affects blood coagulation and tissue integrity. Russell's vipers are known for their aggressive defensive behavior when threatened, striking with remarkable speed and accuracy. Their venom contains powerful enzymes that cause severe tissue damage, internal bleeding, and coagulopathy, making them particularly lethal without immediate medical intervention. The species accounts for more fatal snake bites in India than any other venomous snake. According to evidence recovered at the scene, Rohan located a Russell's viper approximately 4 feet in length near a rock formation. The snake was positioned in a typical defensive coil when Rohan approached the area. Phone activity logs indicated he began recording at 2:23 p.m., documenting his approach to the animal. Disturbed ground around the rock formation suggested he had been moving closer to the snake while maintaining his recording. Forensic analysis of the scene revealed footprints indicating he had circled the snake multiple times before the fatal encounter. The attack occurred when Rohan attempted to grab the Russell's viper with his bare right hand while continuing to film with his left. The snake struck immediately, its fangs creating puncture wounds in his right forearm approximately 4 inches below the elbow. The venom was rapidly absorbed into the surrounding tissue and lymphatic system. Although early systemic symptoms often take 20 to 40 minutes to appear, the intensity of Rohan's envenomation indicated a large venom dose, possibly involving penetration into a small vessel, one of the conditions that can lead to life-threatening progression within the same night. Physical evidence at the scene, including his dropped phone, displaced tripod, and scattered belongings, indicated he stumbled backward immediately after the strike. Investigators used the disturbed soil, drag marks, and the limited blood present at the site to reconstruct the initial bite location and his subsequent movements. Within minutes, Rohan began experiencing intense throbbing pain and rapidly spreading swelling at the bite site. Russell's viper venom induces early severe swelling, blistering, and tissue breakdown before internal bleeding begins. His arm became visibly distended and discolored as the swelling progressed upward. Early neurovascular compromise and dizziness are consistent with severe envenomation, and his belongings suggested he struggled to maintain balance. Blood pattern evidence showed that Rohan attempted to walk toward the main road, covering an estimated 600 to 700 feet before his condition deteriorated. Russell's viper venom rarely causes significant external bleeding early. Internal bleeding and coagulopathy usually begin within 1 to 3 hours. However, the bite likely punctured a small superficial vessel, producing intermittent bleeding that investigators later used to track his movements. Rohan collapsed within approximately 45 to 60 minutes of the bite, a timeline medically realistic only in cases of very high venom load or early cardiovascular shock, both of which matched his symptoms. His breathing became strained, and he showed signs of early hemorrhagic shock, including confusion, weakness, and rapidly dropping blood pressure. He survived for several hours after collapse. Experts later determined he entered the critical stage of envenomation, where massive coagulopathy, internal hemorrhage, and early kidney injury begin to take hold. These complications typically become fatal 6 to 12 hours after a severe bite, a timeline matching Rohan's case given the venom dose and remote location without treatment. Death occurred later that night, not instantly, but within the medically documented 6 to 12-hour fatality window seen in severe Russell's viper cases. He ultimately succumbed to hemorrhagic shock and acute kidney injury. The combination of progressive internal bleeding, worsening organ failure, and circulatory collapse proved fatal in the isolated field, far from medical assistance. Post-mortem findings revealed severe coagulopathy, widespread internal bleeding, and extensive tissue necrosis consistent with late-stage Russell's viper envenomation. Local farmer Suresh discovered Rohan's body the following morning during his routine field inspection at approximately 7:30 a.m. Police arrived within an hour of the emergency call and secured the scene. Investigators recovered Rohan's phone, recording equipment, and the cloth bag he had brought for capturing snakes. GPS location data and phone activity logs helped reconstruct the timeline of events leading to his death. The phone's battery had died at 6:47 p.m. the previous day, confirming that the bite occurred in the early afternoon, and death followed later that night. The autopsy, conducted at a regional medical facility, confirmed massive tissue damage, severe coagulopathy, internal hemorrhage, and acute kidney injury, findings fully consistent with untreated Russell's viper envenomation, progressing over several hours. Toxicology confirmed the presence of Russell's viper venom metabolites and ruled out alcohol or drug involvement. Rohan's family expressed devastation over his death, with relatives stating they were unaware of his increasingly dangerous content creation activities. His social media accounts were later deactivated. Local authorities used the incident to warn young creators about the hazards of attempting high-risk stunts for online fame. The Maharashtra Forest Department issued updated guidelines for individuals entering rural areas known for snake activity. Educational programs were launched in nearby schools to increase awareness of snake safety and the dangers of handling venomous species. It was September 23, 2016, in a desert-edge community of North Scottsdale, Arizona, where upscale residential developments bordered the pristine Sonoran Desert. The area was characterized by luxury homes built directly against protected desert preserve land, creating a unique interface between human habitation and wild terrain. Temperatures during late September typically ranged from 65 to 95 degrees Fahrenheit. conditions that kept desert wildlife active during nighttime hours. The community had experienced a notable increase in rattlesnake encounters due to ongoing drought conditions that drove snakes closer to residential water sources. Olivia Smith, 31-year-old night shift medical technician at a regional healthcare facility, had been struggling with mounting gambling debts accumulated over the previous 18 months. Her financial situation had deteriorated to the point where she faced potential eviction from her apartment and had exhausted all legitimate borrowing options. Colleagues at the medical facility had noticed her increasing stress and frequent absences, though none were aware of the extent of her financial crisis or her desperate measures to resolve it. For 2 months prior to this incident, Olivia had been systematically casing middle-class neighborhoods throughout the Scottsdale area, identifying homes with absent owners and vulnerable entry points. Her method involved observing residential patterns during her off hours, noting when homeowners left for extended periods, and identifying properties with minimal security measures. The target location she selected belonged to Harold Davis, an elderly retiree whose routine she had monitored for 3 weeks. The Davis residence was a single-story ranch home built in 1987, featuring an elevated wooden back porch that provided approximately 3 feet of clearance above the desert floor. The property backed directly onto protected desert preserve land, where wildlife regularly moved between natural terrain and residential structures seeking shelter and water. Local homeowners had reported frequent encounters with javelinas, coyotes, and various snake species, particularly during warmer months when animals sought cooler daytime refuges under human structures. Olivia had observed that the elderly couple frequently left their rear sliding door unlocked and had departed 5 days earlier to visit family in California. Her plan, as later reconstructed from evidence and witness statements, involved accessing the property through the desert approach to avoid street-facing surveillance and entering through the rear sliding door she had confirmed was accessible. The western diamondback rattlesnake, scientifically known as Crotalus atrox, is the largest venomous snake species in Arizona and one of the most dangerous reptiles in North America. These heavy-bodied serpents typically measure 3 to 5 feet in length, with exceptional specimens reaching up to 7 feet. Their potent hemotoxic venom contains powerful enzymes that destroy blood cells, damage tissue, and disrupt the circulatory system. Western diamondbacks are known for their defensive behavior when cornered, producing their characteristic rattle warning before striking. However, in confined spaces or when surprised, they may strike without warning. The species commonly seeks shelter under porches, sheds, and other human structures during hot weather, making encounters with homeowners and intruders alike a documented occurrence in desert communities. According to evidence recovered at the scene and forensic reconstruction, Olivia approached the Davis residence around 1 a.m., having parked her vehicle 3 blocks away on a residential side street. She carried a small backpack containing burglary tools, including a pry bar, screwdrivers, and latex gloves. Her approach route took her through approximately 200 yards of desert terrain before reaching the property's rear boundary. The attack occurred when Olivia crawled under the elevated back porch structure to access the sliding door. Phone records indicated her last activity at 1:47 a.m., providing investigators with a precise timeline. The crawl space beneath the porch measured approximately 3 feet in height and extended 8 feet towards the house foundation. She used her phone's flashlight to navigate the confined space, which had accumulated desert debris and provided ideal denning habitat for reptiles. Midway through the crawl space, her light illuminated a western diamondback rattlesnake coiled directly in her path. The snake, measuring approximately 4.5 feet in length, had established a den site in the space several weeks earlier, as evidenced by shed skin fragments recovered during the investigation. When her light illuminated the western diamondback rattlesnake in the confined space, it struck immediately without producing its characteristic warning rattle. The first strike hit Olivia on the upper left arm, near the shoulder, delivered as she crawled forward and unintentionally entered the rattlesnake's strike range. The narrow crawl space prevented her from standing or retreating quickly, leaving her upper body exposed. Startled and trying to push herself backward, she shifted her weight and extended her right hand directly into the snake's defensive coil. This sudden movement triggered a second strike, with the rattlesnake's fangs penetrating the back of her right forearm rather than her hand. Both bites occurred within seconds of each other, resulting in what medical experts later classified as massive envenomation. Olivia managed to crawl backward out of the space, but collapsed immediately in the backyard. The double envenomation had delivered an unusually large cumulative venom load, far exceeding survivable levels without immediate anti-venom treatment. Her phone sustained damage during the encounter, either from impact or moisture, preventing her from calling for emergency assistance. The venom began its destructive process immediately, causing severe pain, rapid swelling at both bite sites, and systemic effects throughout her body. Within 30 minutes, both bite locations had swollen significantly, with her left shoulder and right forearm becoming visibly distorted. The hemotoxic venom began destroying red blood cells and damaging blood vessel walls, leading to internal bleeding and falling blood pressure. Her breathing grew increasingly labored as the venom disrupted her circulatory system and blood chemistry. The massive dose of venom caused a rapid onset of coagulopathy, preventing her blood from clotting properly. Bleeding began at both bite sites and internally throughout her body. Her blood pressure dropped to critical levels as the venom continued its systemic destruction of her circulatory system. Within 1 hour of the initial bites, she had lost consciousness due to hemorrhagic shock. Death occurred several hours after the initial envenomation as progressive circulatory failure and cascading organ shutdown overwhelmed her system. The venom's disruption of blood clotting caused widespread internal hemorrhaging, while venom-induced tissue destruction and metabolic collapse placed catastrophic strain on her kidneys and cardiovascular system. The resulting coagulopathy and multi-organ failure proved fatal, despite her age and previously good health. Post-mortem examination revealed extensive internal bleeding, marked coagulation failure, and severe tissue necrosis, consistent with advanced western diamondback rattlesnake envenomation. Neighbor Mrs. Patterson discovered Olivia's body at 6:30 a.m. while walking her dog along the desert preserve boundary. She immediately contacted emergency services upon seeing the body in the Davises' backyard. Police and paramedics arrived within minutes, though Olivia had been deceased for several hours. Detective Ray Martinez led the investigation, which quickly revealed the criminal nature of Olivia's presence at the property. Evidence recovered included burglary tools, latex gloves, and a pry bar found near her body. Her vehicle was located 3 blocks away, with additional burglary equipment inside. Footwear impressions matched her path from the desert approach to the backyard, confirming her intended route of entry. The medical examiner's autopsy confirmed death by western diamondback rattlesnake envenomation, with massive tissue damage and coagulopathy from double envenomation. Toxicology reports ruled out alcohol or drug involvement. The investigation revealed Olivia's gambling debts and financial desperation, providing a clear motive for the attempted burglary. Olivia's family expressed shock at learning about her criminal activities and gambling addiction, stating they were unaware of her financial problems. Her employer confirmed her recent performance issues and unexplained absences. The case highlighted the intersection of personal desperation and wildlife encounters in desert communities. The incident was officially classified as an accidental death during the commission of a felony. Local authorities used the case to remind residents about securing their properties and the importance of professional wildlife removal services. The Davis family returned from their trip to find their property had become a crime scene, though they expressed sympathy for Olivia's family, despite the circumstances. While Olivia's fatal encounter with Arizona's deadliest rattlesnake demonstrated how criminal desperation could lead to unexpected wildlife encounters, other incidents across the globe continue to reveal the deadly consequences when humans underestimate nature's most dangerous predators. From the remote jungles of Southeast Asia to the urban centers of South America, apex predators continue to claim lives in ways that defy human expectations and challenge our understanding of wildlife behavior. It was August 19th, 2013, on the Arctic archipelago of Svalbard, Norway. It was late in the Arctic summer, and the sun never fully set. The camp sat in a bare valley of ice and rock, with a few tents standing against the wind. Everything looked calm, but the area was never completely safe. Hannah Depp was 29 years old, a graduate student from Germany completing her research on glacial rock formations. She had worked for years to earn her spot on the university team, and was known by her professors as meticulous. This was her first Arctic trip, one she had dreamed of since childhood. Hannah was not reckless. She followed instructions closely, though she sometimes pushed herself to prove she could handle the field, as well as her more seasoned colleagues. Her group of 7 lived together in a cluster of tents near Ny-Ålesund, one of the world's northernmost settlements. The team's leader, along with a local guide, carried rifles for protection against polar bears. They were reminded daily never to wander too far alone, to keep flares close, and to scan the horizon for movement. Still, after 10 uneventful days, most of them grew comfortable. Hannah wanted to collect a final set of samples from a ridge not far from camp, and when the evening seemed calm, she chose to step out on her own. The area was mostly flat, covered with gravel, patches of ice, and exposed rock. Meltwater streams crossed the ground, and apart from the wind, the place was quiet. The camp sat in a valley surrounded by ridges, giving a sense of open visibility, though the shadows of the terrain sometimes hid movement until it was close. It was a place where silence could be misleading. Polar bears are the largest land carnivores in the world. Adult males can weigh over 1,000 pounds and measure up to 10 feet standing. They move faster than most imagine, sprinting as quickly as a human can run. Though their diet consists mainly of seals, they are opportunistic and known to stalk people on Svalbard. Attacks are rare, but when they happen, survival is slim. The locals warn every visitor, never let your guard down, and never walk alone. Warnings had been repeated many times that week. The guide had noticed tracks 2 days earlier, though no one saw the bear itself. A helicopter pilot delivering supplies had also mentioned sightings near the coast. The team discussed it over dinner, but after so many quiet nights, the words felt like distant concerns. When Hannah left camp that evening, 2 colleagues saw her cross the ridge and assumed she would return quickly. She carried no rifle and no flare, only her sampling kit and field notebook. Minutes later, a polar bear came from behind a ridge and walked directly toward the camp, closing the distance. Witnesses said it walked with slow, deliberate steps, sniffing the air. Hannah stood about 50 yards away as the bear moved closer. She noticed it and raised her arms to appear larger as she had been taught. For a moment, the bear paused, its head tilting as if studying her. Then it lunged. The impact knocked her onto the gravel. Her scream carried across the camp as the bear pressed her down with its weight. Witnesses said she tried to move, kicking and twisting, but the animal clamped onto her shoulder, the sound of bone breaking carrying across the valley. Her colleagues scrambled for flares and fired 2 upward, but both shots missed. The bear stayed locked on her, raking at her side as the shouting around camp grew louder. Moments later, the bear began to shake her, gravel grinding into her clothing and skin. A witness later told police he heard another snap, sharper and louder than before. Another recalled how the metallic smell of blood was strong in the cold air. The group tried to get closer, waving and yelling, but the bear hardly moved off her. It then tore at her midsection, lifted her briefly, and dropped her back onto the ground with force. By the time the guide reached the site with a rifle, Hannah was motionless. A warning shot cracked through the valley, and only then did the bear retreat, slipping back into the ridges as quietly as it had arrived. The entire attack lasted less than 2 minutes. When it ended, blood covered the gravel, and torn pieces of her jacket lay scattered across the ground. Her sampling kit lay overturned, the notebook pages stained dark. A helicopter was called in, and she was airlifted to Longyearbyen. Despite rapid evacuation, doctors could not revive her. She was declared dead that night, her injuries far too severe. Her body was returned to Germany within days, where her funeral was held in a small village church. Classmates and family gathered in silence, remembering her dedication and the risks she had taken for her field. Norwegian authorities launched a review of safety practices for research groups on Svalbard. They reinforced the rule that no one should leave camp alone and that rifles and flares must always be kept within reach. For Hannah's colleagues, the memory of her final moments stayed with them long after the camp was dismantled. What remained at the site was a ridge marked by scattered rocks. The last place she had stood before the silence of the Arctic was broken. It was June 12, 2014, in the backcountry of British Columbia. The day began with clear skies and mild air, the kind of weatherfield crews preferred for hiking ridges and mapping rock layers. The forest was quiet around them, but it was the kind of silence that never lasted. In places like this, danger was always possible, even if the men had learned to brush off the thought. Daniel Jamestone was 42 years old, a geologist from Kamloops. He had spent most of his career in fieldwork, walking long hours across mountainsides and valleys for mining surveys. He was reliable, steady, and often chosen as lead for his calm approach. Away from work, he was a family man, married with 2 children, ages 8 and 10. To friends, he was not adventurous in the reckless sense. He planned his trips carefully and made sure his team had what they needed. This survey had taken him into deeper wilderness than usual, accessible only by helicopter. The project was to map fault lines along a remote slope, part of a mining exploration program. For Daniel, the trip was routine, but he admitted to colleagues that he liked the quiet of the backcountry. He saw it as a chance to work without interruption, away from office noise and city schedules. Cougar sightings had been reported in the area, but the team of 3 believed they were safe in numbers. The terrain was rough but open in places. Gravel slopes slid underfoot, and patches of spruce and fir trees stood close together, their branches shading the ground. Meltwater from the higher ridges cut through the soil in narrow streams, and the sound of water carried faintly in the air. The remoteness made the setting feel both calm and uneasy at once, a place where few people went, but predators had lived for centuries. Cougars, also called mountain lions, are apex predators in British Columbia. Adult males can weigh up to 150 pounds and stretch over 7 feet from nose to tail. They are ambush hunters, relying on stealth and sudden bursts of speed rather than prolonged chases. Their bite force and claws are strong enough to kill deer in seconds. Attacks on people are rare, but when they happen, they are quick, violent, and often fatal if the victim is alone. Warnings had reached the crew even before their drop-off. Conservation staff had circulated alerts of cougar activity, and locals reminded the surveyors to stay close together and keep noise levels high. In the first few days, they saw no signs. By the 3rd day, they grew more relaxed, focusing on rock samples and GPS mapping. Daniel trusted the rule of safety in numbers and allowed himself to walk a little behind when checking loose outcrops. It was a small decision that would prove costly. That afternoon, the team moved across a slope of broken rock. Daniel slipped on loose ground and fell a few steps behind. The others kept walking, expecting him to catch up. Within seconds, the forest's silence broke. A cougar leapt from an overhang above, its body almost blending with the rock and brush until it was on top of him. Witnesses later described the speed as shocking and noted that cougars are almost always silent until the moment they strike. The cougar clamped its jaws on Daniel's neck and shoulder, pulling him down hard onto the gravel. He kicked and twisted, his boots scraping across the loose rock, but the weight of the animal kept him pinned. His scream carried through the trees, and the other men turned in panic. One yelled while the other threw rocks, trying to drive the animal off. A hammer struck its side, and for a moment the cougar let go. Daniel tried to move forward on his hands and knees, but before he could get far, the cat circled and lunged again. Its claws tore across his back as it clamped down once more, pressing him flat against the ground. The men later recalled the growl of the cougar, the scrape of boots against rock, and the silence when Daniel stopped moving. Blood spread across the gravel where he lay. Startled by the shouting, the animal slipped back into the brush. The two men froze in place, holding flares they had never managed to use. When they reached Daniel, his injuries were severe. The puncture wounds in his neck and shoulder bled heavily, and he was unresponsive. They used the satellite phone to call for help, but the rescue team could not reach them before nightfall. The body was retrieved by helicopter the following morning. His sampling kit and notebook were found nearby, stained with blood but still intact, the last traces of the work he had come to do. Conservation officers tracked the cougar that same day, following signs in the brush. By the following evening, it was located and euthanized, standard protocol for attacks of this kind. Officials later explained that the animal was a healthy adult male, likely hunting deer in the area. For Daniel's family in Kamloops, the news was brief and devastating. His funeral was small and private, attended by relatives, friends, and co-workers who spoke quietly about his steady character and years of dedication. Authorities used the incident as a reminder. Field crews were told again that noise and close spacing are their best defenses in cougar country. Tools like hammers and rocks had given the men seconds, but not enough. In the weeks that followed, Daniel's colleagues replayed the events again and again, remembering how fast the attack began and how quickly it ended. The wilderness that he had loved for its silence became the place where he was silenced, leaving only the empty slope and the sound of water running through the rocks. It was September 18th, 2015, in Yellowstone National Park. The early fall air was cool, and thin clouds drifted above Hayden Valley. At first, the day looked ordinary, with the same calm and quiet visitors that they often expect in the park. Yet, Hayden Valley is also a place where encounters with wildlife can turn dangerous without warning. Karen Bruce was 34 years old, a doctoral candidate in geology from Colorado. She had been working on her dissertation about volcanic rock samples and was excited to spend time in Yellowstone, where the landscape gave her material she could not find elsewhere. Karen was disciplined in her work, careful with her notes, and patient with long days in the field. She was respected by her professors and known by classmates for keeping a level head. This trip was an important step for her. She had been granted access to work with 2 park rangers who guided her through the areas where rock sampling was permitted. For Karen, it was a chance to show she could manage serious fieldwork in a demanding environment. She was aware of the risks, but believed that with trained rangers beside her, the chances of real danger were slim. Hayden Valley was broad and open, with grasslands broken by scattered brush. Bison were spread across parts of the meadow, and shallow streams ran through the low ground. The soil was damp from rain the night before, and the air was cool and steady. Visibility across the valley was generally good, but near the slopes, patches of willow and dense shrubs created cover where large animals could stay hidden until they moved into the open. Grizzly bears are among the most powerful animals in Yellowstone. Adult males can weigh more than 700 pounds and run at speeds close to 35 miles per hour. Their bite is strong enough to crush bone, and their claws can tear through muscle with ease. While most bears avoid people, surprise encounters often lead to charges. Park officials remind all visitors to carry bear spray at the ready, since even seconds of delay can make the difference between escape and tragedy. There had been warnings in the park that week. Rangers had posted notices of recent grizzly activity in the valley, especially in areas where berries were abundant. Several hikers reported seeing tracks along trails, and one group had observed a bear crossing the meadow days earlier. Karen and the rangers read the postings, but with no bears spotted during their shift, they felt the chances of trouble were low. Their bear spray stayed in their packs instead of in their hands. By mid-morning, the group stopped near a slope where Karen wanted to take samples. She moved slightly ahead of the rangers to examine the rocks. The men stayed back, watching the valley floor. The scene was quiet until a sudden movement broke the stillness. A large grizzly emerged from the brush less than 100 feet away, its head low and body tense. Karen froze as the bear charged. Witnesses later described how quickly it covered the distance, the sound of its paws pounding the ground growing louder in seconds. She stood still, arms stiff at her sides, and before she could react, the bear slammed into her and knocked her flat onto the wet soil. The rangers shouted and rushed for their spray, but the canisters were buried in their packs. The bear clamped its jaws onto Karen's side and pressed her against the ground. She tried to twist, her boots sliding in the mud, but the animal pinned her with its full weight. One ranger pulled out his spray too late, and the other threw a rock, but neither action changed the attack. The bear pressed her harder into the ground, then raked its claws across her torso, tearing through her jacket and skin. Witnesses later said what stayed with them was the mix of sounds: the bear's heavy breathing, the scrape of soil under its paws, and the short cries that ended too soon. The struggle did not last long. As the rangers shouted and tried to move closer, the grizzly finally released her, backed away from the body, and turned into the brush until it was out of sight. The rangers reached Karen immediately. She was motionless, her injuries severe and beyond help. They radioed for emergency assistance, and within minutes, medics were on their way. A rescue team arrived quickly by vehicle, but there was nothing more to do. She was declared dead at the scene. Her body was flown back to Denver, where her funeral was small and quiet, attended by family, professors, and classmates. Her colleagues described her as determined and committed, someone who cared about her work and believed in finishing what she started. Park officials reviewed the case and stressed the same lesson they had repeated for years. Bear spray must be kept ready, not stored in packs. They reminded researchers and visitors alike that even trained rangers are at risk when basic precautions are missed. Karen's death became another example of how fast a grizzly encounter can turn fatal, and how even experienced people can underestimate the speed and strength of the animals that live in Yellowstone. It was July 7th, 2016, in Kenya's Rift Valley. The sun was setting low in the sky, and the long shadows from the escarpments stretched across the farmland. The evening was calm, with only the sound of birds calling from the trees. But in this region, where farms and wild bushland met, dusk was often the most dangerous time of day. Michael Mitzifor was 47 years old, a geologist from Nigeria. He had worked for more than 20 years in the field and was respected for his patience and attention to detail. His colleagues knew him as steady and methodical, someone who double-checked samples and recorded notes carefully, even after long, exhausting hours. Away from work, Michael was a family man. He lived in Lagos with his wife and 2 grown children. He often spoke of wanting to give his children the stability he never had in his early years. His work in geology had allowed him to travel, but the demands were difficult. This assignment in Kenya was important to him not only for his career, but also because the pay would help support his children through university. For him, the risks of working in remote terrain were outweighed by the chance to build a stronger future for his family. The survey site was set along the Rift Valley escarpments. The ground was dry with loose soil, rocks, and small patches of farmland next to the bush. Fields of maize and millet bordered the area, and acacia trees grew in scattered groups. When the wind picked up, dust was carried through the air. At dusk, the light dropped fast, and shrubs along the edge of the bush made it hard to see movement until it was close. Elephants are common in this part of the valley. Adult bulls can weigh as much as 12,000 pounds and stand more than 10 feet at the shoulder. Despite their size, they move quickly, reaching nearly 25 miles per hour when charging. Their tusks can puncture with lethal force, and their trunks and legs are powerful enough to crush. While many elephants are calm if left alone, they become aggressive when startled or when they believe humans are too close to feeding areas or calves. In the days before the incident, the survey team had been warned. Villagers pointed out fresh dung and trampled paths near water points where elephants had passed recently. They urged the geologists not to linger after sundown. The warnings were clear, but the team was focused on completing their work. With equipment scattered across the site, Michael and the others felt it was better to pack everything before leaving. They had already stayed late the previous 2 nights and wanted to avoid coming back for gear in the morning. That evening, Michael lifted one of the heavier cases, balancing it awkwardly as the light faded. His teammates were collecting their tools, moving slowly across the uneven ground. The fields were quiet, and for a moment it seemed like they would finish without issue. Then the stillness was broken by a sharp trumpeting. From the edge of the bush, a bull elephant stepped into view. Its ears were spread wide, and its trunk swung low, dust rising around its feet. Witnesses said the animal appeared tense, moving with purpose as it advanced. Some later suggested the elephant had been disturbed by nearby farming activity, which often pushed animals closer to human paths. Whatever the cause, the bull was already agitated when it spotted the survey team. Michael tried to move quickly, but the heavy case slowed him. The elephant lowered its head and charged, its steps pounding against the dry soil and echoing across the field. In seconds, it closed the gap. Michael stumbled, the equipment slipping from his shoulder. The bull drove a tusk into his side and knocked him down hard. The others scattered, some diving behind bushes, others sprinting toward the edge of the fields. They shouted, waving their arms, but none dared move closer. The elephant pressed its weight onto Michael, trampling him into the dirt. Witnesses described the thudding sound of each step, the crack of bone, and the dust cloud that rose with every movement. Michael stopped moving after the first impact. The bull trumpeted once more, then turned back toward the bush. In a short time, it moved out of sight into the trees. The field stayed quiet except for the voices of the men as they came back together. When the team approached, Michael was lying face down in the dirt. His clothing was torn, his gear lay scattered, and the dust around him was marked with deep impressions from the elephant's feet. The team radioed for assistance, but with darkness setting in, recovery had to wait until morning. They stayed nearby through the night, keeping watch for more movement in the bush. At dusk, they covered Michael with a canvas sheet from their supplies, then waited until authorities could reach the site at first light. Authorities later arrived with vehicles to collect the body. His remains were placed in a stretcher and covered before being transported out of the valley. His samples and notebooks, some stained and damaged, were also gathered. Within days, his body was flown back to Nigeria. The funeral was held in his hometown, where family, friends, and colleagues gathered. It was a quiet service, with co-workers remembering him as disciplined and steady, someone who gave careful effort to his work. His children, now left without their father, carried forward his memory as a man who valued persistence and sacrifice. Kenyan officials later reviewed the case. They reminded companies to end fieldwork earlier in the evening and to take local warnings seriously when elephants were active nearby. Coverage of the incident remained regional and received little international notice. For Michael's team, however, the memory stayed vivid. The place where they had measured rocks and collected samples became the place where they witnessed how quickly safety could end when the path of humans and wildlife crossed. It was November 12, 2018, in the Sundarbans along the Bangladesh-India border. The tide was low, and the mangroves spread out in a maze of roots and narrow channels. To most, the morning looked ordinary, with still water and the calls of distant birds. Yet in this place, danger often came quickly, hidden in the thick brush where the forest met the mud flats. What seemed quiet could change in seconds. Arif Hossain was 38, a geologist from Khulna, working on a government contract to collect soil samples from the coastal forest. He was steady in his work and had a reputation for being patient, careful with measurements, and dependable when deadlines pressed. His wife and young daughter depended on his income, and though he knew of the tiger risks in the region, he agreed to the assignment because it offered more pay than his usual work. For him, this trip was both a responsibility and a chance to prove himself reliable to his superiors. He had heard stories of tigers moving through villages, taking livestock, even people, yet he believed the team's size and the presence of rangers would reduce the risk. The team agreed to keep close, finish the soil sampling quickly, and head out well before dusk. He carried a small kit, tools for digging, and a notebook to mark sample points. A small tin of chili powder, sometimes used as a crude deterrent in the Sundarbans, had been left behind with one of the rangers. At the time, it seemed unimportant. The Sundarbans were a challenging environment to work in. Mangroves grew tightly along the creeks, their roots sticking out of the mud. The air smelled of salt water mixed with decay from plants left behind as the tide went out. Crabs moved across the mud while birds searched in the shallows. The canopy blocked much of the light, and once away from the open banks, it was hard to see more than a few yards. In that cover, movement could stay hidden until it was near. Tigers in the Sundarbans are smaller than those found inland. Adult males usually weigh between 350 and 420 pounds, still powerful animals with long limbs adapted for moving through swamps and mangroves. They are capable swimmers, often crossing tidal channels, and their diet includes deer, boar, and sometimes people. Unlike tigers in many parks, Sundarbans tigers are often bolder around humans, shaped by years of living in overlapping territory with villages and fishing grounds. Attacks are not rare, and locals recognize that the animals strike quickly and with little warning. That morning, the team worked near a creek, the tide pulling water out and exposing soft mud along the banks. Villagers had warned them earlier about recent tiger tracks near farmland only a few kilometers away. The rangers repeated their instructions to stay close, avoid the thickest cover, and remain alert. Even in daylight, the mangroves were dim, and movement could be hidden within a few yards. As the group spread slightly to check different soil points, gaps opened between them. Arif stepped several yards off the main path toward a patch of exposed ground where he wanted a cleaner sample. His colleagues could still see him, but the brush behind him was dense. The men later said they noticed how quiet it had become. Bird calls stopped, and the sound of crabs moving in the mud was suddenly sharp. One ranger had begun scanning the tree line when it happened. A tiger came out of cover with sudden speed, its body low, crossing the distance in seconds. Arif barely turned before it struck, clamping its jaws into his neck and shoulder and forcing him into the mud. The weight of the animal pinned him before he could struggle upright. Witnesses shouted, some throwing sticks and striking metal to make noise. The tiger did not let go, pulling Arif backward into thicker cover. His boots scraped against roots, leaving marks in the mud. For a brief moment, the men still saw him on the ground with the animal over him, before both slipped deeper into the mangroves and out of sight. The sounds carried longer than the sight. Colleagues later recalled hearing only a few short cries, cut off quickly, along with the snapping of branches as the tiger dragged him into cover. Within moments, the swamp was silent again. The group advanced only a short distance before stopping. The ground was unstable, and they feared provoking the animal further. Rangers fired a warning shot into the air, but by then, both Arif and the tiger were gone. Search teams returned the following morning with more rangers and villagers who knew the terrain. They followed drag marks in the mud, broken roots, and patches of blood. About 200 yards from the site, they found parts of his kit, his sample bag torn, notebook soaked, and a tool partly buried in wet soil. Deeper inside the mangroves, they discovered partial remains, scattered near roots where the tiger had fed. The recovery was slow and careful, the team using poles to probe the mud before stepping in. His body was flown back to Khulna 2 days later. The funeral was held in his neighborhood, attended by relatives, neighbors, and colleagues from his department. The service was quiet, marked by prayers and the simple acknowledgement of a life ended in the line of work. His wife and young daughter received modest support from authorities, though far less than many had hoped. Officials classified it as part of the ongoing human-tiger conflict in the Sundarbans, noting that such attacks, while tragic, were an established risk in the region. The story did not spread far beyond local papers. For those who worked with him, it was a reminder of how quickly conditions in the field could turn. For the villagers who lived near the mangroves, it was another chapter in a long history of living alongside tigers, one where the balance of survival often tipped unpredictably. It was August 12th, 2015, in a quiet neighborhood in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. The late afternoon sun was setting, casting long shadows across the well-kept lawns. From the street, nothing seemed unusual, and the houses looked calm. But inside one of the homes at the end of the street, an accident was quietly taking shape. Roger Halston was 45 years old and lived alone in his 2-story house. He had been obsessed with snakes since his 20s, and over the years had built a collection of more than 50 snakes. His collection included large Burmese pythons, king cobras, and several species of vipers. He had changed his home to fit them, filling the basement with glass tanks, heat lamps, and other equipment. The air was thick with the musky smell of snake waste, which he considered a minor problem. Roger spent his time reading about snakes, keeping feeding logs and watching behavior, rarely leaving the basement for anything else. A week earlier, Roger had bought a rare white king cobra from a private seller. Known for being unpredictable, the snake was considered both a challenge and a prized addition among collectors. Earlier that week, a python had bitten him while he was fixing its tank, but he dismissed it as minor. That evening, he planned to feed several snakes at once, confident he could manage the risks. Friends and fellow hobbyists had warned him repeatedly against handling multiple venomous snakes at the same time, warning that even a small mistake could be fatal. But he ignored them. The basement was dimly lit, with heat lamps buzzing above each tank. Feeding containers and empty boxes were scattered across the floor, along with snake-handling tools and partially prepared frozen rodents. The aisles between tanks were narrow, leaving little room to move. The snakes themselves ranged from 10-foot Burmese pythons to adult king cobras, each capable of deadly defensive behavior if startled. Pythons squeeze with enormous strength, and venomous snakes like king cobras and vipers can strike quickly, affecting the nervous system or delivering tissue-damaging venom. Neighbors had noticed unusual activity in Roger's home. Some had seen large boxes of snakes arriving and were sometimes overwhelmed by the smell coming from his basement. A few had casually warned him about stacking tanks too high and overfilling his space. Local rules required secure handling and containment for venomous snakes. But Roger, overconfident in his experience, ignored the warning signs. He overlooked hissed warnings, defensive coiling, and repeated strikes at his gloved hands during routine feeding. At about 7:45 p.m., Roger began the feeding process. He carried several dead rodents into the basement, moving from tank to tank. The vipers were the first to react defensively. One viper jerked backward sharply when Roger's hand approached, narrowly missing a bite. Distracted, he stepped awkwardly, his foot catching the edge of a nearby python tank. The small python tipped over, falling with a crash that echoed across the cramped basement. The noise startled several snakes in the immediate area. One python lunged defensively at Roger's legs, followed moments later by another reacting to nearby movement. The white king cobra, sensing sudden disturbance, struck defensively at exposed arms and legs. Each snake acted independently, responding to vibrations, sudden motions, and unfamiliar sounds in its immediate environment. Other snakes coiled defensively or retreated to corners of the basement, avoiding direct involvement. A neighbor, Sarah Peterson, later reported hearing loud hisses, thuds, and breaking glass faintly audible through a partially open basement window. Alarmed, she called 911. Roger's struggle lasted only a few minutes. By the time help arrived, he was found unresponsive, partially coiled by one large python. Bite marks were evident from the king cobra, which had begun causing severe neurotoxic effects, and from several vipers. The floor was scattered with broken glass, bedding, and overturned feeding containers. 3 of the snakes were captured in temporary boxes, while the remainder hid in basement corners or dense vegetation near the house, out of sight. Security cameras from neighbors captured some movement and disturbances, confirming that the sequence of events, including slipping, tipping a tank, and startling the snakes, directly led to the fatal incident, though the strikes themselves were not visible. Investigators concluded that the bites and constriction were defensive responses, not a coordinated attack. Paramedics attempted to stabilize him while animal control worked to secure the remaining snakes. Despite their efforts to administer antivenom and provide emergency care, the combined effects of multiple venomous bites and progressive python constriction had already caused severe damage. The king cobra's venom affected his nervous system. The viper bites caused tissue damage, and the python's gradual constriction further complicated his breathing and blood circulation. In the weeks following the incident, the city reviewed private ownership regulations for venomous reptiles, imposing stricter containment and liability rules. Prospective snake owners were now required to obtain special permits, maintain secure enclosures, and carry liability insurance. The incident also prompted discussions about the ethics and safety of keeping large collections of venomous snakes in residential areas. Wildlife experts emphasized that these animals, while fascinating, require specialized knowledge, proper facilities, and respect for their dangerous nature. It was May 3rd, 2016, in a remote village by the river in Pará, Brazil. The morning was foggy from the village. The river looked calm and slow, but the shadows along the water hinted at hidden dangers below the surface. André Silva was 32 years old and had spent years studying snakes. He was an amateur snake expert who worked with a small local zoo. He documented snake movements and sometimes caught specimens for research. He lived with his wife and young child, who he talked about often. He saw his work as a way to balance his interest in snakes with providing for his family. Andre was confident in his field skills and experienced with large snakes, but his confidence sometimes made him take unnecessary risks. He often went into thick jungle areas alone, believing his knowledge and strength could handle environmental dangers. That day, he planned to trap and measure a female anaconda that locals had warned was unusually aggressive. Andre had been tracking the river and its tributaries for weeks. He mapped snake locations, noted water depths, and recorded movements. He carried measuring tools, a small net, and a bag with snake handling equipment. He wore waterproof boots and lightweight clothing, but the forest floor was slippery and tree roots stuck out unpredictably. Despite these precautions, the thick vegetation and shallow streams created hidden dangers. The riverbank was soft and muddy, and the water often hid sudden drop-offs. The target of Andre's expedition was a female green anaconda that could reach over 20 feet long and weigh several hundred pounds. These snakes kill by squeezing, applying huge pressure until prey suffocates. While they are usually ambush predators, anacondas react quickly to threats, striking defensively if disturbed. Their muscular bodies allow them to coil and pull even large animals into water, where escape becomes difficult. Warnings had been frequent. Villagers mentioned unusual behavior from the anaconda, including getting upset when boats came near and sightings of her coiled near fishing paths. They told Andre not to enter the water alone or try to corner the snake, but he ignored these observations, trusting his handling techniques and experience with smaller snakes. He stepped into a tributary around 4 p.m., believing it to be shallow, unaware of a sudden drop-off hidden by murky water and water plants. As Andre waded in, his foot sank deeper than expected, causing him to lose his balance. He bent forward to steady himself, accidentally disturbing the anaconda, which had been coiled along the bank. Villagers on a nearby ridge saw him stumble and noticed the massive green body of the snake rising in a defensive posture. Andre tried to step back, but the anaconda's coils gradually wrapped around his legs and lower body, pulling him slowly toward deeper water. His bag and tools scattered into the shallows, creating noise and further agitation. The struggle lasted several minutes. The initial coil around Andre's legs restricted his movement, and each of his attempts to free himself caused the snake to adjust its position, gradually tightening its grip. His arms moved through mud and reeds, stirring the water, while the anaconda shifted defensively rather than aggressively hunting. Water rose to his waist and then chest as the snake's strength slowly pulled him farther into the tributary. From the ridge, villagers could see floating items, his hat, and scattered tools, but the details of the snake's hold were mostly obscured by reeds and murky water. Despite splashing and struggling, Andre could not free himself, and the surrounding brush prevented direct assistance. By the time local rescuers reached the tributary, the snake had released him and withdrawn into the riverbank vegetation, likely due to lack of movement or perceived threat. Only the coils remained briefly visible in the shallow water. Andre's body was never recovered. The river and its deep channels had hidden all trace. His measuring tools, net and bag, were found partially floating downstream, muddy and waterlogged. Villagers conducted a ceremonial ritual along the river, leaving offerings to honor his memory and the forces of the river, a customary practice for those lost to natural hazards. Later, the same anaconda was spotted but never captured, moving silently through the tributary system. The incident showed the dangers of underestimating the environment and overestimating personal skill. Investigators noted that the drop-off Andre had misjudged, combined with the snake's defensive response, created a realistic and fatal situation. It was September 21st, 2014, in rural Queensland, Australia. The evening was humid and it had rained earlier. Storm clouds were overhead. From the farmhouse, the property looked calm. But on one edge of the land, something dangerous was about to happen. Luke McAdams was 29 years old and had worked as a farmhand on his family's property for most of his life. He lived with his partner and was responsible for taking care of the fields, livestock, and buildings. Beyond farm work, he was interested in snakes, especially pythons, which he kept in a small area near the edge of the property. Recently, he had gotten a 12-foot carpet python, which was unusually large even for that type of snake. Luke had spent weeks getting it used to its new home, feeding it and watching its behavior. He thought he could handle it safely. Though he had some experience, he sometimes took unnecessary risks, including checking on the snakes at night when it was hard to see. That night, Luke wanted to check on his snakes before the rain came back. He had already noticed minor scratches on his arms from handling the python earlier in the week, but he thought they were no big deal. His partner had told him to secure the enclosures properly and suggested waiting until daylight. But Luke ignored the advice. He wanted to make sure the snakes were fed and accounted for. He underestimated how stormy conditions could make the ground slippery and make it harder to access the outdoor pens. The enclosure area was an open space with a dirt floor that was muddy from earlier rain. The fence was low and reinforced with wire mesh. Each tank and pen had branches, rocks, and hiding spots for the snakes, but space was cramped and crowded. Light rain was falling, making surfaces slippery under the dim outdoor lights. The 12-foot carpet python's pen had a metal latch that was slightly bent from previous use. Its grip was weakened just enough that a moment of not paying attention could allow the snake to escape. Carpet pythons are non-venomous constrictors that can subdue prey by wrapping their muscular bodies around it. A large python of this size can immobilize an adult human over several minutes, gradually increasing pressure with each coil. Usually they avoid confrontation, biting only defensively, and constriction becomes effective slowly rather than instantly. Wrong moves, loud movements, or startled reactions can cause defensive strikes from even well-adjusted snakes. Earlier that evening, neighbors had seen Luke moving between pens in the dark. They saw him lean over the large python's enclosure and occasionally inspect the latches. Stormy weather made the ground slippery, limiting safe footing. The latch on the python's enclosure was slightly bent and loose, enough that a startled snake could push it open, though Luke did not notice the problem. At around 9 p.m., Luke bent down to check the python's water dish. His foot slipped in the mud, causing him to stumble forward. The slight movement was enough to startle the python. It slipped past the weakened latch and rose from the pen with a low hiss, initially coiling around his lower legs. Luke tried to step back, but the wet ground made him slip, and the snake tightened gradually as he struggled. The neighbors, watching from their farmhouse a few hundred feet away, could make out Luke's shape moving strangely and heard muffled calls, but the low light and distance prevented them from seeing any details of the struggle. The python gradually moved higher as Luke struggled, restricting his arm movements and compressing his chest over several minutes. Mud splashed, branches rustled, and his flashlight fell to the ground. The snake's actions were deliberate and defensive, responding to sudden motion and noise, not hunting. Slowly, Luke found it harder to breathe and move, the constrictor's strength increasing with each coil. By the time his partner reached the enclosure with a flashlight and shouted for help, Luke was completely unable to move. Attempts to manually pull the python off without proper tools were dangerous and often caused the snake to tighten its grip further. The snake remained coiled defensively around him. Emergency animal authorities were called, and when they arrived, they killed the python to safely recover his body. The scene showed the python's coils had wrapped progressively, with the ground churned in mud and water. Minor scratches on his arms and legs matched prior handling incidents, and disturbed plants showed the struggle had been real. and went on for a while. The aftermath led to the temporary closure of the property's snake collection. Inspectors documented all enclosures, latches, and pens. Recommendations were made for secure containment, nighttime handling precautions, and additional training for anyone working with large constrictors. It was June 7, 2017, in the bustling Chalai market in Thiruvananthapuram, Kerala. The morning air hung thick with moisture from the previous night's monsoon rains. By midday, something would happen in one corner of this crowded marketplace that would change how venomous snakes were sold in Kerala forever. Ravi Menon was 40 years old. A lean man with calloused hands and deep-set eyes had been selling exotic reptiles for nearly 15 years, operating from a small wooden stall squeezed between a spice merchant and a woman who sold jasmine garlands. Ravi lived alone in a cramped room above his shop. His only companions the dozen snakes he kept in wooden boxes and glass terrariums. The locals knew Ravi as a man who took dangerous risks. While other snake handlers used long metal hooks and thick leather gloves, Ravi preferred to work with his bare hands. He believed that direct contact allowed him to better read the animal's moods and movements. Customers would gather in small crowds to watch him lift cobras and vipers from their containers, mesmerized by his apparent fearlessness. Ravi had been waiting for this particular morning for 2 weeks. A wealthy collector from Kochi was coming to see his newest acquisition, a monocled cobra he had purchased from a dealer in Tamil Nadu. The snake was magnificent, nearly 4 feet long with distinctive eye spots on the back of its hood. It was also increasingly aggressive, coiling tightly whenever anyone approached its container and spreading its hood at the slightest disturbance. The marketplace that morning buzzed with its usual energy. The stone floor was slick with water and crushed vegetables, making footing treacherous in some areas. Monocled cobras are among India's most dangerous snakes. Unlike their larger king cobra cousins, they are smaller but far more aggressive when cornered. Their venom contains powerful neurotoxins that attack the nervous system, causing paralysis and respiratory failure within hours if left untreated. In the wild, they prefer to retreat when threatened, but in captivity, with nowhere to escape, they become unpredictable and defensive. Experienced handlers knew to give these snakes plenty of space and always use proper tools. But Ravi had grown overconfident through the years, without a serious accident. Just 3 days earlier, a young boy had wandered too close to the cobra's container, and the snake had struck at the glass so violently that several customers had jumped back in alarm. Ravi had laughed it off, telling the boy's worried mother that the snake was just showing off. He had dismissed the incident as normal behavior, refusing to acknowledge what other handlers would have recognized as clear warning signs. The day went on, and Ravi arranged his stall carefully, positioning the cobra's wooden box on the counter, where the collector would have the best view. Inside the container, the snake remained coiled in the back corner. Around 10:15 a.m., Ravi spotted his customer making his way through the crowd. Ravi began preparing for his demonstration. He had done this hundreds of times before. Lift the snake, show its hood, demonstrate its alertness to prove its quality. When Ravi opened the cobra's container, the snake was already pressed against the front wall with its hood spread. Its tongue moved quickly, and its body was tight. Instead of staying in the back corner like usual, it was ready to attack. The cobra bit Ravi as soon as he put his hand inside. The snake moved very fast and bit his wrist above his watch. The pain went up his arm right away. Ravi tried to pull back, but the cobra held on and wrapped around his arm. People screamed and ran away, knocking over fruit and breaking bottles on the ground. The collector just stood there, shocked. For several seconds, that felt much longer. Ravi fought with the snake around his arm. The cobra's hood was wide open, showing the marks that give these snakes their name. Every time Ravi moved, the fangs went deeper and more poison went into his body. Finally, Ravi hit his arm hard against the wooden table. This made the cobra let go and fall back into its box. The snake curled up right away. Ravi stepped back, holding his bleeding arm. You could see 4 holes where the fangs had bitten him. The market became very busy and loud. The spice seller next door tore a piece from a cloth bag and tied it around Ravi's arm. Someone ran toward the main road to get help, yelling for drivers to move out of the way. The collector was scared, but stayed calm now. He got down next to Ravi and pressed hard on the cloth as blood came through it. Ravi stayed sitting up, but his body was shaking. The feeling of no sensation moved past his hand, and his words were hard to understand when he tried to talk. The morning traffic was very heavy, so it was a small 3-wheel taxi and not an ambulance that took Ravi away. The driver used his horn the whole time as people and motorcycles moved out of the way. At one point, Ravi's head fell to the side and the collector shook him hard to keep him awake. Doctors met them at the hospital door and took him quickly into the emergency room. They gave him medicine to fight the snake poison right away, but by then, Ravi's arm had grown very big with swelling. His skin had turned dark with marks that went past his elbow. The treatment saved his life, but left his hand weak forever. 3 of his fingers never got full feeling back, and his grip strength never came back. The bite changed more than Ravi's body. It changed the market. Local government workers said that all dangerous snakes must be kept behind locked walls, and they started checking the stalls without warning. Ravi's cobra was taken away and sent to a government snake research center. Months later, Ravi closed his stall for good. The small space was taken over by a vegetable seller, but people who shop there still pointed out to new people. That's where the snake man was bitten, they say. It is a quiet warning that even the most skilled handler can run out of luck. It was October 18th, 2018, near a research station outside Manaus, Brazil. Steady rain had left the forest floor wet and slippery, with mist clinging to the trees and rainfall masking distant sounds. Though the station looked calm, the flooded terrain was hazardous for anyone moving through it. Clara Fernandez was 27 years old and a herpetology student doing field research on venomous snakes. She shared a small cabin with 3 fellow students and spent most of her days cataloging species, measuring specimens, and recording behavior for her thesis. Clara was careful and detailed in her work, but she was known among her peers for taking calculated risks. She would work alone and sometimes remove gloves to get better touch observations. That morning, she planned to study a bushmaster near a flooded section of the forest, intending to record detailed behavior and habitat notes. She carefully packed her equipment: a handheld camera, field notebook, measuring tools, and her personal protective gear, leaving gloves aside for closer observations. By mid-morning, Clara had moved along narrow trails through dense vegetation. The forest floor was waterlogged, with mud pooling in low spots and small streams running unpredictably beneath her feet. Fallen leaves and submerged roots made footing uncertain. Birds were quiet, and insects were less active under the persistent rain. Clara noticed broken branches, disturbed leaves, and shallow depressions in the mud. These were signs that animals had recently moved through the area. She knew these were indications of nearby snakes, but felt confident in her knowledge and experience. Her peers had repeatedly warned her against entering flooded zones alone, particularly in areas known for bushmasters, but she believed she could manage a brief observation. The bushmaster is one of South America's largest vipers and can reach 10 feet long. Its venom is highly dangerous, capable of rapid bleeding throughout the body, tissue death, and low blood pressure. These snakes are ambush predators that generally avoid humans but will strike repeatedly if threatened. They are heavy-bodied and able to deliver precise, multiple strikes. They can adjust their position defensively when an intruder continues to bother them. Around 3:15 p.m., Clara reached a particularly flooded patch near a tributary. The water was murky, hiding roots and small drop-offs, and the mud was thick underfoot. She knelt at the edge of the water to examine tracks and take measurements. As she shifted her weight to steady herself, her foot slipped on a submerged root, causing her to stumble. In doing so, she accidentally disturbed a bushmaster hidden beneath leaf litter and shallow water. The snake reacted immediately, striking defensively. The first bite landed on her lower leg, puncturing the skin and causing sharp pain. Clara tried to step back, but the slippery, uneven terrain made it difficult to regain balance. Each movement sent vibrations through the water and mud, which the bushmaster perceived as continued threats. The snake struck again, biting her lower leg and calf in quick succession before recoiling into the leaf litter. While bushmasters do not squeeze like pythons, Clara's struggle in the mud and water slowed her movements and made retreat difficult. Her arms and hands disturbed floating debris and leaves, adding further stimuli, and her handheld camera and notebook fell into the water, partially submerged and catching glimpses of the tense scene. From a nearby tree platform, her fellow students could see splashes and floating items, but vegetation partially blocked their view of the snake. The encounter lasted only moments, but each bite injected venom, causing immediate local swelling and sharp pain. Clara focused on regaining her footing, the mud and water presenting almost as much danger as the snake itself. Clara was aware of the potential body-wide effects, including tissue death, low blood pressure, and blood clotting problems, but she had to first focus on moving through the flooded terrain while keeping herself upright. Field anti-venom kits were brought to the scene within 20 minutes. Clara received initial treatment from her peers while being prepared for evacuation. She was then airlifted to a hospital in Manaus, where doctors monitored her for body-wide poisoning. The bushmaster's venom had caused local tissue damage, swelling, and early signs of clotting disruption. Emergency care included giving anti-venom, pain management, and close monitoring of blood pressure. Over the following days, she underwent surgeries to remove dead tissue and prevent infection. Recovery required several months of physical therapy to restore movement and strength in her affected leg. The incident prompted a reassessment of fieldwork rules at the research station. Solo work in flooded areas was banned, and mandatory protective equipment, including gloves and stable footwear, was required. Equipment handling and communication rules were revised to ensure students remained in visual or radio contact at all times. Clara's partially recovered camera footage and field notes were preserved for research and safety training purposes. The incident showed how quickly a combination of environmental dangers, defensive animal behavior, and human error can escalate into a dangerous situation. Her movements, although instinctive, provoked a realistic defensive response from the bushmaster, highlighting the delicate balance between observation and safety in field research. By the end of the season, the research station had implemented stricter guidelines and incorporated the incident into safety briefings. Clara's experience became an example for new students of the importance of staying cautious, using protective equipment, and respecting both the environment and the animals being studied. Her careful documentation and survival reinforced the value of preparedness, emergency response, and measured risk-taking in the field. In today's episode, we're exploring 5 deadly encounters where snake enthusiasts paid the ultimate price, from a respected herpetologist whose overconfidence proved fatal to a reptile rescuer whose final mistake cost her everything. Let's begin with the first story, where one woman's obsession with venomous serpents led to her downfall. It was March 15th, 2016, and the sprawling desert landscape outside Phoenix, Arizona, stretched endlessly under the late afternoon sun. The isolated ranch-style home sat on 5 acres of scrubland, surrounded by towering saguaro cacti and rocky outcroppings that provided perfect habitat for the region's diverse reptile population. The property's remote location, nearly 20 miles from the nearest neighbor, offered complete privacy for activities that most people would consider unthinkably dangerous. Diane Kruger had been living alone in this desert sanctuary for 8 years, ever since her divorce from a husband who couldn't understand her growing fascination with venomous snakes. At 47, the insurance adjuster had transformed her modest home into something resembling a private zoo, with over 30 species of deadly serpents housed in custom-built enclosures throughout every room. What had started as a casual interest in reptiles during a childhood visit to the zoo had evolved into a consuming obsession that dominated every aspect of her life. Diane's collection represented years of careful acquisition through reptile shows, private breeders, and online forums where enthusiasts traded rare specimens. She had no formal training in herpetology or venom extraction, but considered herself an expert through decades of self-study and hands-on experience. Her neighbors remained blissfully unaware of the deadly menagerie living just miles from their own homes, and Diane preferred it that way. The crown jewel of her collection was a magnificent 6-foot eastern diamondback rattlesnake that she had acquired just 2 weeks earlier from a breeder in Georgia. The massive serpent, with its distinctive diamond-patterned scales and considerable size, was regarded as one of the most formidable venomous snakes in North America among experienced handlers. Eastern diamondback rattlesnakes are the largest venomous snakes in North America, with adults commonly reaching 5 to 6 feet in length and weighing several pounds. Their venom is primarily hemotoxic, capable of causing rapid swelling, significant tissue damage, clotting disruption, and systemic shock without prompt medical treatment. Large individuals can deliver substantial venom in a single defensive strike, and severe envenomations can become life-threatening if care is delayed, especially in remote areas where response times are extended. That Sunday evening, a partially filled glass of wine was found on the kitchen counter, and feeding tools were laid out nearby, indicating she had been tending to her collection before the incident. The enclosure for the eastern diamondback was open, and the water bowl had been removed, suggesting she began routine cleaning while moving through her feeding tasks. Diane opened the custom-built terrarium and reached across the enclosure to remove the water bowl. Gloves and handling tools were present in the room, but were not in use when responders later examined the scene. The terrarium door was fully open, the bowl was positioned on the table beside her tools, and the placement suggested she was midway through a routine cleaning step when the incident occurred. When investigators arrived, the eastern diamondback was found coiled at the rear of the enclosure, a posture consistent with a defensive response after a disturbance. Based on the angle of the bite marks on Diane's forearm and the blood pattern on the floor, her arm entered the snake's strike range while she was reaching inside the enclosure. Eastern diamondbacks deliver extremely fast defensive strikes, and the wound spacing matched a rapid forward extension typical for the species. The puncture depth on her forearm indicated a full strike and release, which aligns with the species' normal behavior. Large rattlesnakes typically inject significant venom during such strikes, and the immediate swelling and blood loss documented at the scene were consistent with a high-volume envenomation. After striking, the snake retreated to the back corner, where it remained until responders secured it. Blood from the puncture wounds formed a trail from the enclosure toward the adjacent room, indicating she moved away immediately after the bite. Her phone was recovered on the floor nearby, consistent with an attempted call. Rapid swelling, discoloration, and bleeding at the bite site matched significant hemotoxicity hemotoxic envenomation. Without antivenom, systemic effects typically progress over hours, producing increasing weakness and impaired coordination. The extent of swelling, discoloration, and tissue damage observed during examination reflected the progression of untreated hemotoxic envenomation. Such effects can lead to shock and organ failure without rapid antivenom administration, and the remote location significantly delayed any chance of medical intervention. With no access to immediate care, she deteriorated over the next several hours and ultimately lost consciousness inside the home. A postal worker discovered Diane's body 3 days later when accumulated mail raised concern. Responding officers found numerous venomous snakes housed throughout the residence, some in improvised enclosures, but all were contained. Wildlife officials temporarily seized the animals for evaluation and initiated a review of her permits and housing conditions. Local authorities later examined existing exotic animal oversight procedures but did not implement immediate law changes. It was August 22, 2014, and the small private herpetology research lab where Dr. Michael Webb worked had already gone quiet for the evening. The facility sat on the outskirts of a rural Florida town, housed in a modest single-story building used by a handful of contracted researchers studying regional reptile species. After hours, the empty hallways, locked offices, and dim lighting gave the place a stillness that often left late-working staff completely alone. Dr. Michael Webb had been working late in the lab for weeks, driven by mounting pressure to produce results necessary to renew his research contract. At 38, the respected herpetologist had built his reputation on groundbreaking studies of coral snake neurotoxins, but recent funding cuts had forced him to accelerate his research timeline. His colleagues had gone home hours earlier, leaving Michael alone with his specimens and his growing sense of urgency. Michael's research focused on the unique properties of coral snake venom, which differed significantly from the hemotoxic venoms of rattlesnakes and vipers. His work had potential applications for developing new neurological medications, but the delicate process of venom extraction required precise timing and absolute safety protocols. Internal emails and previous lab notes showed he frequently expressed frustration with what he considered overly cautious procedures. The lab's safety regulations required 2 researchers to be present during any venom extraction procedures, along with comprehensive protective equipment and emergency protocols. Michael had been circumventing these rules for months, working alone after hours to avoid oversight and accelerate his research progress. Coral snakes are among North America's most medically significant venomous snakes. Despite their small size and reclusive behavior, these slender reptiles rarely exceed 2 feet in length, but their venom contains neurotoxins that interfere with nerve signaling and can lead to progressive paralysis. Early symptoms may include subtle changes such as slurred speech or difficulty swallowing, with respiratory impairment developing later as the paralysis advances. Because coral snake bites often produce little pain, minimal swelling, and only tiny puncture marks, the envenomation can appear deceptively mild at first, with serious symptoms emerging gradually over several hours if untreated. That Friday evening, Michael was working with a particularly active coral snake specimen that had been recently captured for his research. The small serpent, with its distinctive red, black, and yellow banded pattern, appeared far less imposing than the larger vipers he regularly handled. Its small size and bright coloration, traits that often lead handlers to underestimate coral snakes, had been noted in Michael's previous handling logs, providing context for the reduced caution seen in the footage that night. Michael performed the venom extraction procedure without the required second researcher present, as confirmed by facility access logs and internal camera footage. Handling tools were available on the workstation, but the footage showed him attempting to position the coral snake manually rather than following the lab's standard restraint protocols. As he adjusted his grip, the coral snake delivered a quick, close close-range bite to his thumb, a common defensive response during handling. Footage showed the snake maintaining contact for a brief moment, long enough to allow venom delivery, which is typical when coral snakes secure a bite rather than striking and releasing. The small fangs produced 2 faint punctures, and available footage showed him repositioning the animal immediately afterward, unaware of the severity of the envenomation. The bite appeared minor, leaving only tiny puncture marks with no immediate pain or swelling, features typical of coral snake envenomation. Security footage captured him returning to his workstation and continuing his notes, behavior consistent with not recognizing the bite as medically serious. Within about 30 minutes, Michael began showing early signs of neurotoxic envenomation. Lab timestamps and handwriting irregularities in his notes indicated slurred speech and visual difficulty, symptoms consistent with interference of cranial nerve function caused by coral snake venom. As the evening progressed, his condition worsened. Object handling captured on camera became increasingly uncoordinated, and a recorded attempt to call for help revealed speech that was difficult to understand. The call did not provide enough information for dispatchers to identify his location or the nature of his emergency. Neurotoxic effects continued to develop, leading to progressive muscle weakness and impaired respiratory function. Footage showed him bracing against the desk, with increasingly shallow breathing consistent with advancing paralysis of the muscles needed for respiration. Sometime later that night, Michael lost consciousness at his workstation as respiratory failure progressed. With the facility locked for the evening and no co-workers present, there was no opportunity for timely assistance. He was found the following morning during a routine security check. The subsequent investigation documented repeated violations of safety protocols and a pattern of working alone with venomous specimens. Following the incident, the lab's management reviewed and tightened its internal procedures, emphasizing proper oversight and mandatory 2-person operations during high-risk work. It was June 8, 2017, and the suburban neighborhood in Houston, Texas buzzed with the typical activity of a warm summer evening. Children played in front yards while parents tended gardens, and neighbors chatted over fence lines, creating the picture of American suburban tranquility. Behind the walls of one modest ranch home, however, a far more dangerous reality existed that none of the friendly neighbors could have imagined. Jennifer Valdez had been living her double life for over 2 years, maintaining the appearance of a normal 29-year-old veterinary technician while secretly housing a collection of exotic venomous snakes in her spare bedroom. Her work at a local animal clinic had sparked an interest in reptiles that quickly evolved into an obsession with the most dangerous species she could legally acquire. Jennifer's collection had grown through careful purchases at reptile shows and online dealers, where she had built relationships with breeders who specialized in venomous species. She kept her hobby completely secret from friends, family, and co-workers, knowing that most people would consider her passion both dangerous and irresponsible. Her latest acquisition was a juvenile gaboon viper that she had purchased from a private breeder just 1 month earlier. The snake represented a significant step up in danger from her previous collection of rattlesnakes and copperheads. Records from her purchases and handling logs showed she had been gradually acquiring more challenging species, indicating a consistent pattern of increasing risk in the reptiles she chose to keep. Gaboon vipers are large African vipers, known for their thick bodies, broad heads, and exceptionally long fangs relative to their size. Adult specimens can exceed 6 feet and weigh more than 20 pounds, but juveniles, like the one Jennifer kept, are smaller with proportionally shorter fangs. Their venom is primarily hemotoxic and cytotoxic, capable of causing extensive tissue damage, severe bleeding, and dangerous drops in blood pressure if not treated quickly. Although the species is capable of delivering large venom volumes, the effects vary depending on the size of the snake and the depth of the bite. Jennifer prepared to transfer the gaboon viper into a secured holding tub so she could perform routine enclosure maintenance. The open tub, a snake hook, and cleaning tools were found arranged beside the terrarium, indicating she was in the middle of a standard transfer procedure rather than casual cleaning. The position of the overturned tub and scattered equipment showed that the snake slipped from the hook during the transfer, landing on the enclosure floor near the opening. Gaboon Gaboon vipers are heavy-bodied ambush predators, and even smaller specimens can shift their weight unexpectedly during handling. Based on the viper's final position, it had come to rest only a short distance from Jennifer's reach. When she attempted to redirect it toward the tub, the snake reacted at close range. From this short distance, the Gaboon viper thrust forward in a powerful ambush-style strike. Bite marks on Jennifer's forearm showed deep penetration from fangs consistent with a juvenile specimen, and the surrounding blood pattern indicated a rapid, high-volume envenomation. After biting, the snake remained near the enclosure opening until responders later secured it. Evidence of the envenomation's effects appeared quickly. Blood droplets and a smeared handprint on the hallway wall showed she tried to steady herself as she moved toward the living room. Her bag of cleaning supplies was found overturned near the couch, suggesting she may have reached for it out of habit before her strength declined. Over the next 30 to 60 minutes, swelling and bleeding at the bite site progressed, and indicators in the living room, a collapsed posture near the couch and pooled blood on the floor, showed she attempted to sit before losing consciousness. When paramedics entered the home, they found Jennifer unresponsive and in cardiac arrest. Despite resuscitation attempts, the severity of the envenomation and the absence of appropriate antivenom in the region left no viable path for reversal. Following her death, wildlife officers initiated a review of her permits and handling practices, and the incident prompted renewed discussion among local officials about the risks associated with keeping exotic venomous species in residential areas. Wildlife officers and animal control personnel secured the Gaboon viper on scene and transported it to a permitted holding facility. The remaining snakes in Jennifer's spare bedroom were removed for evaluation, as several species required state verification of proper documentation. Her employer at the veterinary clinic confirmed that none of the animals had ever been brought onto clinic property, so the workplace remained open, though staff were notified as part of the investigation's standard questioning. The home remained cordoned off for several hours while officers completed enclosure checks and inventory before it was released to her family. No immediate legal penalties were issued, but her permits and housing conditions were formally reviewed as part of routine post-incident procedures. It was September 14th, 2015, and the small mountain chapel tucked deep in a remote Tennessee valley stood silent in the fading light. The wooden structure used for decades by a tiny independent congregation with its own traditions relied on the privacy of the surrounding hills to practice rituals not commonly seen outside the region. Reverend Samuel Briggs had been the spiritual leader of this small congregation for over 2 decades, following in the footsteps of his father and grandfather, who had established the serpent handling tradition in their family. At 54, Samuel had handled venomous snakes in religious services for most of his adult life, surviving 2 previous bites that he attributed to divine intervention and the power of faith. Samuel's personal collection of rattlesnakes and copperheads was housed in simple wooden boxes behind the church altar, where they waited to be called into service during worship. The snakes were considered sacred instruments of faith based on biblical passages that promised protection from serpents for true believers. Recent entries in Samuel's journals, later reviewed by investigators, described periods of difficulty maintaining the certainty he once expressed during services. Family members also reported that he had been spending more evenings alone at the chapel in the weeks prior, remaining long after scheduled activities had ended. Timber rattlesnakes are large forest-dwelling pit vipers capable of delivering substantial hemotoxic envenomation. Adults commonly reach 4 to 5 feet in length, and their fangs can exceed half an inch. Their venom disrupts blood clotting and damages tissue, and severe untreated bites, especially multiple bites at close range, can become life-threatening over several hours. That Wednesday evening, Samuel entered the empty church alone, carrying his largest timber rattlesnake in a simple wooden box. The massive serpent, nearly 5 feet in length, represented the most dangerous snake in his collection and had been used in countless worship services over the years. Samuel's presence in the chapel that evening was documented only through the items found near the altar: the wooden box, an open Bible, and a chair pulled close to the front. His recent journal entries indicated he had been reflecting on his responsibilities within the congregation, which may explain why he chose to handle the snake alone that night, rather than during a service. When he opened the wooden box and reached inside, the timber rattlesnake reacted defensively to the sudden close contact. In the confined space, Samuel's hand stayed within striking distance as he attempted to lift the snake, and the animal delivered several rapid bites, behavior consistent with close proximity handling incidents documented in similar cases. Bite marks on both hands and forearms showed different angles of penetration, indicating multiple strikes at very short range. Samuel dropped the snake and attempted to return it to its container, but the multiple envenomations had already begun affecting his coordination. Blood droplets on the floor and smudges on the side of a nearby pew indicated he tried to steady himself while moving away from the altar. The effects began progressing within the first hour, with swelling, bleeding, and falling blood pressure worsening steadily as the night went on. Bloodstains near the front pews and the position of a fallen chair suggested he attempted to move toward the exit before collapsing. The hemotoxic venom caused extensive swelling, impaired clotting, and a significant drop in blood pressure, eventually leading to loss of consciousness. Samuel's wife discovered him the following morning when he did not return home. Responders found the wooden box open near the altar and the timber rattlesnake coiled on the floor a short distance away, its location consistent with having been dropped during the handling attempt. Wildlife officers later secured the snake and transferred it to a permitted holding facility for evaluation. The county sheriff's office documented the scene, and the medical examiner determined the cause of death to be complications from untreated hemotoxic envenomation following multiple bites. With no indication of foul play, the investigation remained limited to routine reporting. The small independent congregation later discussed the incident privately, with differing views about the continuation of the long-standing ritual. It was November 3, 2013, in rural northeastern Namibia. A dry heat lingered under a pale sky as wind pushed dust across stretches of thorn scrub and scattered mopane trees. The tin roof of a small reptile rehabilitation outbuilding clicked softly as the metal shifted in the afternoon breeze. Inside the dim structure, wooden racks held plastic tubs and repurposed glass enclosures labeled in fading marker. The place was quiet in the way remote stations often are, where every sound, from a hinge settling to a sliding bin or a glove brushing plywood, seemed sharper than it should be. Selma Kashipa ran the rescue alone most days. At 41, she had left elementary teaching to take in snakes nobody else wanted, confiscations, surrenders, animals from failed roadside shows. She lived in a small trailer on the edge of the 20-acre property and kept a strict routine: feed logs, cleaning rotations, evening walkthroughs, so inspectors would find order even where money was short. Venomous intakes were recent and often arrived with little notice. She handled them with the tools she could afford and the practices she had learned from manuals and field guides. Donors knew her as steady and practical. She built racks from salvaged lumber, stretched every gallon of disinfectant, and drove borrowed coolers of non-venomous colubrids to school programs on weekends. Local officials started calling when other groups declined to take certain confiscations. Antivenom and rapid transport were not resources she had. Reliable medical support could be hours away. The rescue sat behind a wind-bent line of pines. A sand road cut to the outbuildings, where a lean-to covered 2 long shelves of enclosures. Light bled through board seams. The concrete floor was chalked with lime to mark walking lanes. A portable camera pointed down the main aisle to record husbandry and deter trespassers. Her latest intake that week had been a seized black mamba, taken from a private owner who was keeping it illegally. Black mambas are native African elapids with potent neurotoxic venom and high venom yields for their size. Adults commonly exceed 6 feet in length, move quickly when provoked, and deliver venom that can cause progressive neuromuscular paralysis and respiratory failure without rapid antivenom and airway support. In remote regions where medical access is limited, the risk of rapid respiratory compromise rises substantially. Warnings had had been stacking up in small ways. 2 weeks earlier, a volunteer sent photos showing a sagging upper rack. Brackets were rusted, and one screw head rounded smooth. Selma made a note to replace the supports, but kept feeding the animals that day. A notice from regional wildlife authorities had reminded permit holders to avoid solo work with dangerous species and to stage transfers at waist height. She acknowledged the message in a reply, but lacked extra hands. On the afternoon the incident occurred, the video shows her staging the move at dusk. A new glass tank sat on the suspect upper rack. A hook, a clear shield, and a pair of thin work gloves lay within reach. She slid the vented transport tub toward the shelf, left hand under the lip, right hand steadying. As the tub met the shelf edge, the front bracket shifted. The plank dipped a half-inch. The tank slid forward, and she reached to steady multiple enclosures. The mamba was pressed near the handle inside the vented tub. As the sudden slide tilted the container, the lid bounced. She steadied the tub with her left forearm and pushed with her right. The only path the snake had was toward the opening and the large warm object blocking it. From inches away, in confined space, a defensive strike occurred. In the confined opening of the tilted tub, the mamba delivered a single defensive strike before pulling back, a pattern documented when the snake has limited space to follow with additional bites. The camera misses the initial strike, but captures the immediate aftermath. A sharp jerk, the tub clattering to the floor, a hand lifted toward her collarbone as she stumbled back into the aisle. Blood appeared on the concrete and on the glove cuff. Later photographs showed 2 puncture wounds on the inner forearm, where the fabric split. The hook clanged on the rack and lay still. The clear shield bore a smeared mark. She moved toward the office and opened a drawer where she kept gauze and antiseptic. The partially unwound gauze and scissors on the desk indicated an attempt at basic wound management. Her phone remained on the opposite counter, undisturbed. The scene suggested she focused first on stabilizing the immediate area, standard practice at the facility, before her symptoms progressed too far for further action. Within minutes, the recorded footage shows her posture change. Speech, when audible on the brief recovered clip, had become slurred and her breathing quicker. Early neurotoxic effects often begin with subtle cranial nerve impairment, difficulty focusing, drooping eyelids, and unsteady movements. In the recording, the progression is visible. She steadied herself on the desk before lowering into a chair as limb strength declined. Over the next 45 minutes, the deterioration continued. The camera captured increasingly shallow breathing, intermittent attempts to reposition herself, and long periods of immobility. A trail of drops led from the office back toward the aisle and ended beside a folding chair. A bottle of saline lay on its side. The combination of rapid neurotoxin onset, lack of antivenom, and the facility's isolation left no practical path to the airway support required for survival. The footage recorded her sliding partially out of the chair a little over an hour after the bite. No further movement followed. A volunteer arrived after dark for a scheduled check-in when messages went unanswered. He found the office light on, the phone on the floor, and Selma slumped near the chair with shallow pooling beneath her arm. He backed away and called 911 from the road. Paramedics reached the property and confirmed cardiac arrest. Animal control officers secured the mamba using tongs and a transport box before transferring it to a permitted facility. The medical examiner listed the cause of death as complications of untreated neurotoxic envenomation with respiratory failure. The punctured glove, the displaced shelf, and the scattered hardware matched a structural failure during an enclosure move. Remaining animals were inventoried and relocated over the next 2 days. Regional wildlife officers documented the scene and noted the solo work, absent antivenom, and deteriorating rack supports. No broader penalties were issued. The rescue closed quietly. Neighbors collected her personal effects, and the camera's final clip, recorded after the property was cleared, shows the upper rack still a fraction low on the right bracket. A small mechanical fault that, in the end, set the rest in motion. It was July 19th, 2015, and the Texas heat was brutal even as evening approached, with temperatures still hovering near 100 degrees across the sprawling ranch outside Houston. The Martinez family's 500-acre property stretched endlessly under the blazing sun, dotted with oil derricks that had made them wealthy beyond imagination. Behind the main house, a series of custom-built enclosures housed an exotic menagerie that would make most zoos envious. Ashley Martinez was 22 and had never been told no in her entire life. The daughter of oil baron Roberto Martinez, she'd grown up with every privilege money could buy: private schools, European vacations, and the unshakable belief that wealth could solve any problem. 3 years earlier, she'd convinced her father to purchase Raja, a Bengal tiger cub, after seeing one at a private exotic animal auction in Dallas. Ashley had bottle-fed Raja from 6 weeks old, spending countless hours playing with him as he grew from a playful cub into a magnificent 400-pound predator. She genuinely believed their bond transcended the normal human-animal relationship, often telling visitors that Raja was more like a dog than a wild animal. Her father had hired exotic animal experts to advise on Raja's care, but Ashley consistently ignored their warnings about the tiger's increasingly dangerous behavior. The ranch hands had noticed changes in Raja over the past 6 months. The tiger had been displaying more territorial behavior, pacing his enclosure aggressively and showing signs of sexual maturity that made him unpredictable. Several experts had recommended relocating Raja to a professional facility, but Ashley refused to consider separating from her baby. Bengal tigers are among the world's most powerful predators, with males weighing up to 500 pounds and possessing bite forces exceeding 1,000 pounds per square inch. Despite being hand-raised, they retain all their wild instincts and become increasingly dangerous as they reach sexual maturity around age 3. Their hunting instincts are hardwired into their DNA, and no amount of human contact can eliminate their predatory nature. That evening, Ashley was making her daily visit to Raja's enclosure, carrying fresh water and planning to spend time with him as she did every day. The tiger's habitat was impressive. Nearly an acre of fenced area with trees, a pond, and various enrichment features. But no amount of space could change what Raja fundamentally was: an apex predator designed by evolution to kill. Ashley unlocked the enclosure gate and stepped inside, calling out to Raja in the baby talk voice she'd used since he was a cub. The tiger emerged from the shade of a large oak tree, his massive frame moving with fluid grace. At 3 years old and 400 pounds, Raja was in his prime, a magnificent specimen with piercing amber eyes and distinctive black stripes across his golden coat. What Ashley failed to notice were the subtle signs that Raja's behavior had fundamentally changed. His ears were slightly flattened, his tail twitched with agitation, and his gaze held a predatory intensity she'd never seen before. The tiger's sexual maturity had triggered territorial and hunting instincts that overrode years of human conditioning. Ashley bent down to fill Raja's water bowl, turning her back on the tiger in a gesture of trust that would prove fatal. The movement triggered Raja's hunting instincts. The sight of prey bending over activated millions of years of evolutionary programming that no amount of bottle feeding could suppress. Raja launched himself at Ashley with explosive power, covering the 15 feet between them in a single bound. His massive paws struck her between the shoulder blades, driving her face first into the dirt. Before she could scream or struggle, Raja's jaws clamped down on the back of her neck with crushing force. The tiger's canine teeth, each over 2 inches long, punched through Ashley's cervical vertebrae like they were made of paper. Her spinal cord severed instantly, ending her life in less than 3 seconds. Raja's powerful jaw muscles contracted, ensuring the kill was complete before he released his grip and stepped back. Raja grabbed Ashley's lifeless body by the shoulder and began dragging her toward a corner of the enclosure, following the same behavior patterns his wild ancestors had used for millions of years. He positioned the body in a secluded spot and began the territorial guarding behavior typical of big cats protecting their kill. Ashley's absence wasn't noticed until she failed to appear for dinner 3 hours later. Roberto Martinez went looking for his daughter, following the path to Raja's enclosure that she walked every evening. What he found would haunt him for the rest of his life. Raja was lying beside Ashley's body in the corner of the enclosure, occasionally licking at the wounds while maintaining the alert posture of a predator guarding his prey. The tiger showed no recognition of Roberto's presence, treating him as a potential threat to his kill. Local authorities arrived within an hour, but there was nothing they could do for Ashley. Sheriff's deputies were forced to shoot Raja when the tiger refused to leave Ashley's body, showing aggressive behavior toward anyone who approached. The investigation revealed that Ashley had been warned repeatedly about Raja's changing behavior, but had dismissed expert advice as unnecessary caution. The Martinez family faced no criminal charges, as Texas law allowed private ownership of exotic animals with proper permits. Ashley's funeral was attended by hundreds of friends and family members who remembered her vibrant personality and love of animals. Roberto Martinez donated millions to wildlife conservation organizations, hoping his daughter's death might prevent others from making the same fatal mistake. It was March 8, 2016, and the Miami evening was warm and humid, with the scent of jasmine and chlorine hanging heavy in the air around Carlos Mendez's Coral Gables mansion. The sprawling property featured a main house, guest quarters, and an elaborate backyard compound that housed his illegal collection of exotic animals. Hidden from neighbors by high walls and dense vegetation, the compound contained several custom-built pools where Carlos kept his prized alligators. Carlos Mendez was 34 and had built his fortune through a combination of legitimate business ventures and activities that existed in legal gray areas. His import-export company provided cover for various schemes, and his wealth allowed him to indulge in expensive hobbies that most people could never afford. His passion was collecting dangerous animals, particularly alligators, which he kept in violation of numerous local and federal laws. For 5 years, Carlos had been hand-feeding his alligators, taking pride in his ability to work with these prehistoric predators without formal training. He'd gradually acquired larger and more dangerous animals, including Diablo, an 8-foot male American alligator that weighed nearly 300 pounds. Carlos genuinely believed his experience made him an expert handler, despite having no scientific understanding of reptile behavior. That evening, Carlos was entertaining Maria, a woman he'd been dating for several weeks. He'd been drinking heavily throughout dinner, and his judgment was impaired by both alcohol and his desire to impress her with his fearless handling of dangerous animals. American alligators are apex predators that have remained virtually unchanged for millions of years. They can grow up to 14 feet long and weigh over 1,000 pounds, with bite forces exceeding 3,000 pounds per square inch, among the strongest of any living animal. Alligators are ambush predators with lightning-fast reflexes, capable of launching themselves from the water with explosive force. Diablo was Carlos's prize specimen, captured from the Everglades as a juvenile and raised in captivity for 8 years. Despite years of regular feeding, the alligator retained all his wild instincts and had never developed any tolerance for human presence. The 300-pound predator spent most of his time motionless in his custom pool, but his prehistoric brain was constantly alert for feeding opportunities. Carlos led Maria to Diablo's enclosure, a concrete pool surrounded by decorative landscaping. The alligator floated motionlessly in the center of the pool, only his eyes and nostrils visible above the dark water. Against his usual protocol and influenced by alcohol, Carlos decided to hand-feed Diablo instead of using the long feeding pole he normally employed. He wanted to show Maria how fearless he was, how completely he'd mastered these dangerous animals. Carlos knelt at the edge of the pool, holding a whole chicken just above the water's surface. Diablo's prehistoric eyes tracked the movement, his brain calculating distance and timing with predatory precision. The alligator began moving toward the food with slow, deliberate strokes of his powerful tail. Diablo positioned himself directly below the offered chicken, his massive jaws just inches from Carlos's outstretched hand. The alligator's feeding response was triggered by the proximity of the meat, and millions of years of evolution took over. Diablo launched himself from the water with explosive force, his jaws opening wide to reveal rows of conical teeth. But instead of grabbing just the chicken, Diablo's massive jaws clamped down on Carlos's entire forearm. The alligator's bite force crushed bone and severed arteries instantly, while his momentum dragged Carlos into the pool. Maria's screams echoed across the compound as Carlos disappeared beneath the dark water. Diablo began the death roll that made his species so deadly, spinning his massive body in the water while maintaining his grip on Carlos's arm. The rotational force generated tremendous torque, tearing Carlos's arm from his body while the alligator's weight held him underwater. Carlos's struggles grew weaker as drowning and blood loss overwhelmed his system. The death roll continued for nearly a minute, with Carlos's body being twisted and torn by forces no human could survive. Diablo's prehistoric instincts were fully engaged, and he showed no intention of releasing his prey until the feeding process was complete. Maria had called 911, but by the time emergency responders arrived, only pieces of Carlos remained floating in the bloodied water. Diablo had retreated to the far end of the pool, showing no unusual aggression toward the rescue team. Carlos was pronounced dead at the scene, though little remained of his body after Diablo's assault. The investigation revealed his illegal exotic animal collection and led to criminal charges against several associates involved in the smuggling operation. Diablo was euthanized by wildlife officials, along with the other alligators in Carlos's collection. The incident sparked renewed efforts to crack down on illegal exotic animal ownership in South Florida. Carlos's funeral was a small affair, attended mainly by family members who had long worried about his dangerous hobbies. It was September 14, 2017, and storm clouds were gathering over the rural Oklahoma property where Dorothy and Earl Williams had spent their retirement years. The couple's modest ranch house sat on 40 acres of rolling hills and pasture, far from the nearest neighbors. Behind the house, a series of enclosures and buildings housed their most unusual family member, Buster, a 150-pound chimpanzee they'd raised from infancy for 15 years. Dorothy Williams was 68 and had never had children of her own. When she and Earl acquired Buster from a defunct research facility in 2002, she'd poured all her maternal instincts into raising the infant chimpanzee. She'd bottle-fed him, taught him sign language, and allowed him free run of their property. To Dorothy, Buster wasn't a wild animal. He was the child she'd never been able to have. Over the years, several incidents had suggested that Buster was becoming increasingly dangerous as he matured. He'd attacked a delivery driver, destroyed furniture during tantrums, and shown aggressive behavior toward strangers. But Dorothy refused to acknowledge these warning signs, insisting that Buster was just misunderstood and needed more love and attention. Earl had grown increasingly concerned about Buster's behavior, especially as the chimp entered full adulthood and displayed the territorial aggression typical of mature males. He'd suggested relocating Buster to a sanctuary, but Dorothy wouldn't hear of it. Chimpanzees are humanity's closest relatives, sharing 98% of our DNA. But that similarity makes them more dangerous, not less. Adult males can weigh up to 200 pounds and possess the strength of 5 grown men. They have long, powerful arms, opposable thumbs, and canine teeth designed for tearing flesh. Captive chimps often develop severe behavioral problems as they mature, becoming unpredictable and potentially lethal. That evening, a severe thunderstorm was approaching, with lightning flashing across the darkening sky and thunder rumbling in the distance. Buster had always been afraid of storms, and the approaching weather was making him increasingly agitated. He paced his enclosure restlessly, vocalizing his distress and showing signs of extreme anxiety. Dorothy watched Buster's distress from the house, her maternal instincts overriding Earl's warnings to stay away. She'd comforted Buster through storms before, and she couldn't bear to see him suffering alone. Despite Earl's protests, she decided to go to Buster's enclosure to calm him down. Dorothy unlocked Buster's enclosure and stepped inside, speaking in the soothing voice she'd used since he was an infant. But Buster was beyond comfort. The storm had triggered a panic response that made him view any intrusion into his territory as a threat. His 150-pound frame was tense with barely contained violence. As Dorothy approached with her arms outstretched in a gesture of comfort, Buster's fear transformed into explosive aggression. The chimpanzee launched himself at Dorothy with shocking speed, his powerful arms reaching out to grab her before she could react. Buster's first blow caught Dorothy across the face, his knuckles striking with enough force to shatter her cheekbone and knock her to the ground. Before she could scream or defend herself, the chimp was on top of her, his massive hands grabbing her arms and head with crushing strength. The chimpanzee's attack was methodical and brutal. He bit off 3 of Dorothy's fingers, his canine teeth shearing through bone and tendon with ease. His powerful hands beat her about the head and shoulders while his feet kicked at her torso, each blow delivered with the strength of 5 men. Dorothy's screams brought Earl running from the house, but when he tried to intervene, Buster turned on him as well. The chimp grabbed Earl's arm and threw him against the enclosure wall, breaking several ribs and dislocating his shoulder. Earl's injuries prevented him from helping his wife, as Buster continued his savage assault. Buster grabbed Dorothy's hair and slammed her head against the concrete floor repeatedly, causing massive skull fractures and brain trauma. The chimp's attack was driven by panic and territorial instincts that 15 years of human contact couldn't overcome. He showed no recognition of the woman who had raised him. The assault continued for several minutes before Buster finally retreated to a corner of the enclosure, his aggression spent but his agitation still evident. Dorothy lay motionless on the floor, her body broken and bloodied beyond recognition. Earl, despite his own injuries, managed to call 911 from his cell phone. Emergency responders faced a dangerous situation when they arrived. Buster was still agitated and showed aggressive behavior toward anyone who approached the enclosure. It took wildlife officials with tranquilizer equipment nearly an hour to sedate the chimp safely. Dorothy was pronounced dead at the scene, her injuries too severe for any medical intervention. She had suffered massive head trauma, multiple fractures, and severe blood loss from the bite wounds. Earl was rushed to the hospital with serious but non-life-threatening injuries. The investigation revealed that Dorothy had ignored numerous warnings about Buster's increasingly dangerous behavior. Oklahoma wildlife officials had been trying to remove the chimp for months, but Dorothy had used legal challenges to keep him on the property. Buster was euthanized the following day, despite protests from some animal rights groups. The decision was made based on public safety concerns and the severity of the attack. Dorothy's funeral was attended by neighbors and friends who remembered her kindness and dedication to animal welfare. Earl never fully recovered from his physical and emotional injuries, spending his remaining years in a nursing facility. It was June 22, 2014, and the Detroit summer night was sweltering, with temperatures still in the 80s despite the late hour. In an abandoned warehouse district on the city's east side, Damon Jackson's urban compound buzzed with the kind of activity that thrived in darkness. The converted building served as headquarters for his drug operation, complete with reinforced doors, security cameras, and a basement that housed his most prized possession, Leo, an African lion. Damon Jackson was 28 and had built his reputation on fear and intimidation. Known on the streets as D-Money, he controlled several blocks of territory through a combination of violence and psychological warfare. The lion was his ultimate status symbol, a 350-pound predator that commanded respect from rivals and customers alike. Few people knew that Leo existed, but those who did understood that crossing Damon could have deadly consequences. Damon had purchased Leo illegally from a black market dealer 2 years earlier, keeping the lion in a makeshift cage in his basement. The conditions were deplorable. a concrete cell barely large enough for the animal to stand and turn around, with poor ventilation and irregular feeding. Damon had no understanding of big cat behavior or nutritional needs, viewing Leo as nothing more than a living weapon. That night, Damon had been celebrating a successful drug deal with cocaine and alcohol, his judgment impaired by substances and his inflated ego. Several associates were present, and Damon decided to show off by entering Leo's cage to demonstrate his fearless control over the dangerous predator. African lions are apex predators that retain all their wild instincts, regardless of captivity conditions. Adult males can weigh up to 500 pounds and possess bite forces exceeding 650 pounds per square inch. When malnourished and stressed, as Leo certainly was, they become even more unpredictable and dangerous. Leo had been living in deplorable conditions for 2 years, fed irregularly and kept in isolation that had driven him to the edge of madness. The 350-pound lion was severely underweight, his ribs visible through his dull coat. Chronic stress and malnutrition had made him hyper-aggressive and unpredictable, viewing any human presence as either a threat or potential prey. Damon descended into the basement with his entourage, the group's laughter and loud voices echoing off the concrete walls. Leo paced restlessly in his cramped cage, his yellow eyes tracking the approaching humans with predatory intensity. The lion's ears were flattened against his skull, and low growls rumbled from his chest, clear warning signs that Damon was too intoxicated to recognize. Against the protests of his associates, Damon unlocked Leo's cage and stepped inside, his movements unsteady from alcohol and drugs. He wanted to demonstrate his dominance over the ultimate predator, to show his crew that he feared nothing and no one. Leo's reaction was immediate and devastating. The starving, stressed lion saw Damon's intrusion as an opportunity to finally strike back at his captors. The 350-pound predator launched himself at Damon with explosive power, his massive paws striking the drug dealer's chest and driving him to the concrete floor. Before Damon could scream or defend himself, Leo's jaws clamped down on his skull with crushing force. The lion's canine teeth, each over 2 inches long, punched through bone and brain tissue with sickening ease. Damon's body convulsed once as his nervous system shut down, then went completely limp in the predator's grip. But Leo wasn't finished. Years of starvation and abuse had triggered the lion's feeding instincts, and he began consuming his kill immediately. His powerful jaws tore away chunks of flesh while his claws raked across Damon's torso, opening the body cavity to access internal organs. Damon's associates screamed in horror as they watched their leader being devoured by the lion he'd kept as a status symbol. The basement filled with the sounds of tearing flesh and breaking bone, as Leo fed with the desperate hunger of a chronically malnourished predator. The commotion attracted neighbors who called 911, reporting screams and gunshots from the abandoned building. Police arrived to find Damon's associates fleeing the scene, leaving behind evidence of the drug operation and the gruesome remains in the basement. SWAT officers were forced to shoot Leo when the lion refused to leave Damon's partially consumed body. The magnificent animal died protecting his first real meal in months, his natural instincts finally satisfied after years of abuse and neglect. The investigation revealed the full extent of Damon's criminal enterprise, leading to dozens of arrests and the seizure of drugs, weapons, and cash worth millions of dollars. The discovery of Leo's illegal captivity sparked outrage among animal welfare groups. Damon's funeral was sparsely attended, with only immediate family members present. His death had effectively ended his criminal organization, and former associates wanted no connection to the man who'd been killed by his own pet lion. It was November 11th, 2013, and the Montana winter was settling in early, with snow already covering the peaks of the surrounding mountains and temperatures dropping below freezing at night. Helen Kowalski's remote cabin sat in a valley 20 miles from the nearest town, surrounded by dense forest that stretched for miles in every direction. The isolation that had once brought her peace was now filled with the presence of Bruno, a 400-pound black bear who had become her unlikely companion. Helen Kowalski was 71 and had been living alone since her husband's death 3 years earlier. The retired schoolteacher had moved to the Montana wilderness seeking solitude, but the loneliness had proven harder to bear than she'd expected. When Bruno first appeared at her property 2 years ago, scavenging for food scraps, Helen had seen an opportunity for companionship that gradually evolved into a dangerous obsession. What had started as occasional food offerings had become daily feedings, with Helen providing Bruno with everything from table scraps to specially purchased meat. She'd grown to view the massive bear as her friend and protector, talking to him during his visits and finding comfort in his presence. Wildlife officials had warned her repeatedly about the dangers of feeding wild bears, but Helen dismissed their concerns as government interference. Bruno had become completely dependent on Helen's feedings, losing his natural fear of humans and his ability to forage effectively. The 400-pound bear now spent most of his time near Helen's cabin, waiting for his daily meals, and becoming increasingly aggressive when food wasn't provided on schedule. His natural hibernation patterns had been disrupted by the artificial food source, keeping him active well into the winter months. Black bears are powerful predators despite their smaller size compared to grizzlies, with adult males weighing up to 600 pounds and possessing crushing jaw strength. When habituated to human food sources, they lose their natural fear and become dangerous, viewing humans as either food providers or competitors for resources. Their powerful claws and teeth can inflict fatal injuries, and their unpredictable nature makes them extremely hazardous to be around. That evening, Helen had fallen in her kitchen while preparing Bruno's usual meal, injuring her leg and delaying the feeding by several hours. Bruno had been waiting outside her cabin, growing increasingly agitated as his expected mealtime passed. The bear's hunger and frustration were building to dangerous levels, but Helen didn't understand the risk she faced. When Bruno's patience finally ran out, he used his powerful claws to tear through the cabin's screen door, following the scent of food into Helen's kitchen. The 400-pound bear moved through her home with surprising grace, his nose leading him toward the refrigerator where Helen stored his food. Helen heard the commotion and emerged from her bedroom, moving slowly due to her injured leg. Instead of retreating to safety and calling for help, she tried to appease Bruno by offering him food from her kitchen, not understanding that getting between a hungry bear and his expected meal was potentially fatal. Bruno's frustration exploded into violence when Helen moved too slowly to provide the food he expected. The bear's powerful paw struck her across the chest, his claws raking through her clothing and flesh with devastating effect. The impact lifted Helen off her feet and sent her crashing into her kitchen cabinets. Before Helen could recover or call for help, Bruno was on top of her, his massive weight pinning her to the floor. The bear's jaws clamped down on her shoulder and neck, his teeth punching through muscle and bone with crushing force. Helen's screams echoed through the empty cabin as Bruno continued his assault. The bear's attack was driven by hunger and frustration rather than predatory instincts, but the result was equally deadly. Bruno's powerful jaws worked methodically, crushing Helen's ribcage and puncturing vital organs. Her struggles grew weaker as shock and blood loss overwhelmed her system. Bruno eventually lost interest in Helen's motionless body and turned his attention to the refrigerator, using his claws to tear open the door and access the food inside. The bear spent the next several hours feeding in Helen's kitchen, completely indifferent to the woman who had considered him her friend. Helen's body wasn't discovered for 3 days, when a neighbor became concerned about her absence and drove to the remote cabin to check on her. The neighbor found Bruno still in the kitchen, surrounded by the debris of his feeding frenzy and Helen's remains. Wildlife officials were called to remove Bruno, but the bear showed no fear of humans and had to be euthanized for public safety. The investigation revealed Helen's long history of feeding the bear, despite repeated warnings from authorities. Helen's funeral was attended by former students and colleagues who remembered her dedication to education and her love of nature. Her death sparked renewed efforts to educate the public about the dangers of feeding wild animals, with wildlife officials using her story as a cautionary tale. The remote cabin was eventually sold and demolished, but the tragedy served as a stark reminder that wild animals can never truly be tamed, no matter how much affection humans might feel for them.
Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now